Yeah.
Hey, Judy.
Yeah.
Okay, we are now streaming live to YouTube. Get Jane in the room. So I've muted all of your microphones. If you need to unmute yourself to speak, please do. I can try to help call on you or notice if you are still muted. But otherwise, I'm going to have to count on you to unmute your microphones. Please and Ron, let me get them in the room.
Finished by next week's class? Oh, I don't know. Nah, that isn't happening.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. All right, y'all. So as we kind of get rolling this morning, of course, we'll review. As I recall, we stopped around the 20th verse, 20th verse or so of chapter 14 last week. Ruth, I think I saw your hand just go up. Oh, okay. Yes, she's confirming that's where we stopped.
Yep.
So we have some review to do, and then what we'll do is pick up there and move along. We have today probably a wrap up of to some extent of the narrative that we've been in, and then some continuations that allow us to see a theme of sorts that will emerge for the rest of the history as it relates to the monarchy, though there's a lot of other material, of course, in the next two books. So anyway, that's what we'll do today. Who remembers something from last time that we discussed that was really critically important for you or for someone else to remember? Yeah, right. Listen, Luis?
Jeroboam messes up like a lot of leaders have done in the past, and basically it's the whole issue of not following Yahweh. And so his son gets sick, and Jeroboam sends his wife, but tells her to disguise herself as somebody else.
Right.
The Lord tells who in a dream, the one that she goes to, that this is all a trick, and the child will die, and Yahweh's going to take away the kingdom and give Israel a kingdom himself, because basically they messed up the Deuteronomistic promise again.
Yeah, very good, right? So God had set Jeroboam up to be a liberator, to snatch away the northern 10 kingdoms from Rehoboam, who had been wicked, and it really ought to have gone well for him. And obviously the narrator knows that it's not going to go well for him before the story even begins, but you named perfectly that he violated the covenant, not only just the covenant with Moses, but violated this covenant from a Deuteronomistic standpoint. And that particular lens is the really important one. So what does he do that violates that covenant? That might be a good question for us to make sure that we kind of hold on to, because it establishes something of a pattern. Actually,
there would be idolatry, the establishment of the two bull calves,
right,
and disparate places of worship. I think they were placed at Bethel and Dan, so we have multiple worship sites rather than the temple. Yep. And he also allows the priesthood to be chosen outside the tribe of Levi, which is about
anybody.
So I'd say multiple places of worship, idolatry, and the wrecking the priestly agreement would be his three major faults.
Yeah, that's good. It's helpful for us probably to take a look at those as being particularly counter to the Deuteronomistic lens. So often we'll see these lines that say, well, look, David was perfect and upright in all of his ways. And we know that that's not entirely true. But from the lens that says worship needs to be in Jerusalem, and idolatry or syncretism or something along those lines is wrong. David's pretty pure in his sense of loyalty in relationship to Yahweh, even if he's impure in his other relationships in certain ways. The standard of judgment that comes in Deuteronomy for a lot of these other kings is, did they worship or did they cause others to worship foreign gods? And did they exclusively honor the worship of God in the south, in Jerusalem? Those are really important ideas. And it's important for us to remember that those ideas are centered around sort of the origin of this text or this lens, which is in Josiah's time. And we'll get to Josiah in the flow of the narrative, but we remember that Josiah was a great reformer who said, we're not allowed to worship God anywhere but Jerusalem. Everybody come back and worship in Jerusalem, tore down the altars, eliminated the priests who were functioning in those altars and so on and so forth, and tried to get everybody to be focused on Jerusalem. So this is, you might even say this is his lens that we're looking through at some level.
But things aren't going much better, a little better, but not much better in Judah. Rehoboam's beginning to allow idolatry, fertility cults, sacred prostitutes. And in addition to that, alliances are breaking down. He is allowing alliances with powerful countries such as Egypt to break down. And next thing you know, Egypt invades and pillages the temple.
Yeah. We'll get to that today. We haven't read that yet. You're absolutely right. You're right. Okay. And that's also, that's a good bit of foreshadowing that we get in that way, I would say. Anything else? Oh, go ahead, Hutch.
I would say that overall, the picture's pretty depressing. And that if we go back, we have a return of idolatry, which we encounter perhaps for the first time as the tribes hundreds of years earlier were in the wilderness. Golden calves, we return to that. And even we go back to earlier sinfulness. As I scan this, Israel and Judah are at constant warfare with each other now. That is a term, it's a form of national fratricide. So we're back to Cain and Abel, but now it's at a national level. So another tremendous sin has creeped into this whole kingly situation. Yeah,
very good. And just for the sake of it, if we wanted to do that spiritual work to continue to reduce, we would find that idolatry at some level is the original sin of this narrative. Not, and I don't mean that in the technical way that original sin has been used by especially the Western church, but instead the notion that if you go back and trace all of the fractured relationships and brokenness, you would get back all the way to the first humans who crave something other than the relationship they have with Yahweh. They're in perfect relationship and they want power in some cases or something like that. There's a lot of different interpretations of what it is they want, but whatever it is they want, it's not the relationship they have with Yahweh. They are desiring something else. And so they go after the thing that they desire. That fractures the relationship. You have Cain and Abel. And again, a lot of different ways that we can interpret that, but at the very least, we have to say that the ideology in the story drives us to understand that there's a huge dispute between agricultural community or agriculturally centered people and the people who are centered around that sort of nomadic hunter-gatherer style of life. And there's going to be conflict and scarcity, and it drives them toward murder and violence that spills out and spills out and spills out. And so as we go along, we really do see, I think you're right, Hutch, this notion that there's an inescapable sense that all of the conflict is rooted in who humanity has been in relationship to each other and to God through the entire story. This isn't new to Jeroboam and Rehoboam. This is the story of the people in the wilderness still, and this is the story of the first humans in their primordial or primeval relationships and civilizations, and so on and so forth. This is a there is a meta narrative here that's good for us to name. That's helpful.
You're depressing me. Are we just programmed to rebel?
We might be, yeah.
Or we're filled with wrath, if Julian puts it?
Yeah. I think that there are probably a number of different ways to look at it. This is slightly beyond review, but one is from an evolutionary perspective, we are probably programmed in certain ways to be selfish. From an evolutionary perspective, we're probably programmed in certain ways, and programming is not exactly the language we want to use, but we are really good at cooperating in very small groups of people that are exactly like us and share our values or our means of production or something like that. So we're very good at tribalism, would be a way of saying that. And we're really bad at cooperating across tribal boundaries. Those things from an evolutionary perspective, and we can equate that at some level from a, I don't want to do that. From an evolutionary perspective, we can say that we are, that's us. Can we rise above that? Yes, I think so. And really, from the biblical perspective, I think we ought to continue to hold that in no way does the Bible want to show us as really good. The Bible wants to remind us that even the best of us have the capacity to do tremendous harm. And so to show instead that we really, really need God's covenant faithfulness, God's long-suffering tolerance of humanity's capacity to harm, and that God has a solution for us, because if left to our own devices, we wouldn't be able to save ourselves. And at least for Christians, that's where we say the story goes. Okay, Scott, I saw your hand up also. Sorry for the wait.
It's okay. Isn't there a message, and not just through the Old Testament, but that no matter, even if you're God's chosen people, even if you're God's chosen person, king, leader, apostle, prophet, that you're far from perfect. You're going to be screwed up. And that for us then, rather than be depressing, is to understand that if you want to lead a Christ-like life, you can't be Christ. He was the only one that was ever on this earth who wasn't sinful, and that maybe humility and understanding that you're not, but the best you can do is your best, trust in God, and just keep moving on. Yeah.
In many cases, I think that the genesis of our hope is learning that imperfection should be understood as a sort of prerequisite to living. All right, this is part and parcel to who we are, and if we can free ourselves then from the expectation that we are perfect or that someone else will be perfect, and then we navigate life very, very differently, I would hope. And it doesn't mean that we don't strive for being better, or what we might say in Jesus is that we strive to be more human. If Jesus shows us what being fully human is, and we strive to be more like Jesus, then we're really striving for not perfection, but just to grow into the fullness of who we were created to be. And so, yes, absolutely. We want to grow into that fullness without expectation that we will be perfect. And even if we were to be perfect from today on, we still have our baggage from everything we've done prior to this moment. And so we never really make it all the way back to even square one. That's not quite where we are. And so we need the author of salvation to write a new chapter for us. Every one of us does. Paul grounds his entire sense of, well, I shouldn't say his entire. Paul grounds most of his sense of community ethics in that notion. We get it in Romans, that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and therefore all of us are saved in the exact same way, which means no one gets to step on a higher pedestal and say, nope, I'm better, and you must listen to me or respect me or whatever else, and you all are down and I'm up. That just can't be in the kingdom of God. It's a really lovely concept for us.
I think we're naturally judgmental, I guess.
Yeah.
We always have these expectations of whoever the leader of the organization is, whatever the profession happens to be, is to go, yeah, he or she's pretty good, but
Yeah.
let me give you a list of all the things where they're a mess.
Yep.
I mean, we do it here as we look at, David and Solomon and on and on and on is, yeah, but look at this guy.
Yeah.
Well, of course.
Yep, that's right. And just one extra helpful piece for us in the way that we look at these narratives is if that's is something of a guarantee within the source narratives that there will be deep flaws in the people. It's kind of amazing that God keeps using them and choosing them, right? That it's not like God doesn't know Moses or Aaron or David or Solomon is like has the capacity to be a mess and likely will be a mess. But God still says, all right, well, this is the vessel through which I will pass my promise along until I can bring it to fulfillment. I'm not going to bring it to fulfillment necessarily in this person because, what a mess he or she is. But God doesn't give up on God's promises in spite of the fact that God has to work with broken people.
And I don't think there could be a more hopeful message.
What's that?
I don't think there could be a more hopeful message.
Yeah, I agree. And for me, just at an individual level, I would collapse under the weight of ministry if I had that sense of God can't work with broken material. I would have never gotten here. And so, what hope, what tremendous hope. And then, for David, oh gosh, I don't mean to go down this rabbit hole too far, but we know David's messy story. And at the same time, the narrative remembers David as being upright somehow, not upright because the narrators think that we don't know that he violated God's covenant, but his uprightness probably comes from something else. And I think it's good for us to remember that too, that the narrator might be wrong at some level, but the narrator is probably trying to show us that David's loyalty in relationship to God, even if he failed at other things, allows him to be something different than just an ordinary human who screws up a lot. And the same is true, the recollection on Abraham. Even the way that Paul remembers Abraham, his faith was reckoned to him as righteousness. Abraham wasn't righteous, obviously. He was a mess who sold his wife into sex slavery, if you want to look at it that way. Like, he is a mess. And yet, it's Abraham who has some kind of relationship with God that is, and God has a relationship with him that is bigger than his mess, bigger than his problems, bigger than his choices, etc. Can be a really helpful thing for us to consider. All right, last call before we jump back into the text. Seems like I saw one more hand. Okay, Andy.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up. I mean, it's all about putting God first and not being distracted. And I think through activities like this, we're trying to understand God's creation, God's design. How should we live our life? And
yeah,
I think it just wraps around to the Lenten, renew in me a right spirit.
Yeah,
and a lot of this is spiritual as much as what we say and do, and forgiveness, redemption, and salvation. So I thought it was a beautiful conversation there.
That's wonderful, Andy. Thank you. Yeah. Always really good for us to remember that these are not primarily historical texts. This is theological reflection. And these themes are there not so that we can understand that the theme was true once upon a time for some people who lived historically, but instead for us to say that those themes are always true, and for those who want a relationship with God. God is faithful to God's covenant. We're not. God provides better ways to live than we are currently living. We choose otherwise. All those things, they're all there for us because we are all living them. And so how do we try to live more faithfully is a great question for us. Okay, let's jump into the text. It's a little bit after 10:20. Good review. And we will have countless examples of this unfolding for us, sometimes very fast narratives and sometimes narratives that take a little bit longer, but we'll increasingly get this understanding that we're not just dealing with history, we're dealing with theological reflection, and the definition of what makes for a good king or a bad king or whatever will be more and more pronounced as we look at this history, this Deuteronomistic history. So we're in 14, and it seems like we finished verse 20 in a rush, these last two verses. But Jeroboam's dead. That's the, the bottom line there. He made a mess of things, and now he's gone. It's probably worth just noting. Oh, let me go back and check and make sure I'm in the right translation so I don't make that mistake again. Okay, good. It's worth noting that concept that we just talked about, that this isn't history, this is theological reflection. We get these references from time to time, and we'll get a few of them today. The rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, are written in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. So there is a history book somewhere. It's just not what we're reading. What we're reading is something different entirely. So that may be helpful to sum that notion up. All right, we're going to jump to verse 21 and wrap up our story about Rehoboam. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city that the Lord had chosen out of all of the tribes of Israel to put his name there. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite. Judah did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed, more than all their ancestors had done. For they also built for themselves high places, pillars, sacred poles on every high hill, and under every green tree. There were also male temple prostitutes in the land. They committed all the abominations of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, King Shishak of Egypt came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of Yahweh and the treasures of the king's house. He took everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made. So King Rehoboam made shields of bronze instead and committed them to the hands of the officers of the guard, who kept the door of the king's house. As often as the king went into the house of the Lord, the guard carried them and brought them back to the guard room. Now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Judah? There was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. Rehoboam slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. His mother's name was Naamah the Ammonite. His son Ibaijam succeeded him. So we'll just pause there for a second. I know that might not seem like there's anything of great import there, but did you notice anything before we turn the chapter?
The disobedience continues.
Absolutely. And back to Hutch's point, it's not exclusive to the north, right?
Right.
Very important for the narrator to make sure that we see that that's there, because as much as the theme tries to get us to understand that the northern kingdom was destroyed because of their apostasy, the southern kingdom is going to be destroyed also. And so how does the narrator avoid some sense that that's what happened in the north, but what happened in the south? Well, it's going to be the same story. It's going to be the same stories. That's good. What else did you notice? I'm going to point out a couple things that are weird, and we'll just, there's not a lot to say about them necessarily, but they're weird. Oh, there's something we can say about this. All right, let's look at verse 20. Jeroboam reigned 22 years, then he slept with his ancestors, and his son succeeded him. Rehoboam slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors. And remember that when we read ancestors, that could also be fathers. So he was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And you get the extra name of his mother one more time. And then his son succeeded him. So Rehoboam still gets a different conclusion to his narrative that is, it's positive. So in spite of the fact that the southern kingdom is straying under his leadership, the very fact that there wouldn't be parallel in the telling of the conclusion helps to see a little bit of the bias of the narrator. I don't see them as being all that much different, but Rehoboam gets the honorable burial, so to speak, right? Let's see. We talked earlier about in our review, we reviewed ahead a little bit on the fact that the king of Egypt has come up against Jerusalem and taken away the treasures of the house of Yahweh, and how that probably should be seen as foreshadowing at some level. We got male prostitutes. That's fascinating in so many different ways. We've sort of had language around this before, but there's probably a fertility cult that's part of the apostasy here. So altars at high places, pillars and sacred poles, that probably pushes us toward this fertility cult, and the fact that these are on high hills and under every green tree also probably helps us to see that. But the male prostitutes in the land, that's what that's about. That's the men for whom, and there are women who do this also, but the men and women for whom sexual performance as it relates to the cult of the fertility gods is their job, right? All right, anything else we noticed? Oh, one more thing. Ooh, I just scrolled up. Sorry. Okay, Rehoboam and Jeroboam had war continually. Is that the way that our last chapter just played out?
No.
What war?
Yeah.
God, Yahweh wanted the separation to be peaceful and stay that way, I think.
Yep. We have something odd happening. There's a mystery there that we probably will never uncover, but Rehoboam goes back and he musters like 160,000 troops, and they're going to go to war. And then Yahweh says, no, I'll take care of them up there. You take care of you down here. Don't worry about it. And so we talked about this as being a civil war that is cold, right? But it seems to be the case that the narrator knows that we've probably read the book of the annals of the kings of Judah or Israel, and we probably know that there were constant skirmishes and battles going on, and so needs to say something about the fact that they were butting heads all the time, without us necessarily seeing that there was a continually large war. They are probably always fighting, and there's probably violence that's just not named in this narrative. And at least that's one way to clean it up. Otherwise, it's just a really, really odd line. All right, I'm going to pull the text back up. We've seen King Shishak before. That's good. Shoshenk. Okay, verse 1 of chapter 15. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam, son of Nebat, Ibaijam began to reign over Judah. He reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. He committed all the sins that his father did before him. His heart was not true to the Lord his God, like the heart of his father David. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him and establishing Jerusalem, because David did what was right in the sight of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything he had commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. We finally have a narrator acknowledging that was a thing that happened. Thank you, narrator. The war begun between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, which continued all the days of his life. The rest of the acts of Ibaijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? There was war between Ibaijam and Jeroboam. Ibaijam slept with his ancestors, and they buried him in the city of David. Then his son Asa succeeded him. So not a whole lot going on there other than what we named. In the 20th year of King Jeroboam of Israel, Asa began to reign over Judah. He reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, daughter of Abishalom. Asa did what was right in the sight of the Lord, as his father David had done. He put away the male temple prostitutes out of the land and removed the idols that his ancestors had made. He also removed his mother Maacah from being queen mother, because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. Asa cut down her image and burned it at the Wadi Kidron. That's right outside of Jerusalem. But the high places were not taken away. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was true to the Lord all his days. He brought into the house of the Lord the votive gifts of his father and his own votive gifts, silver, gold, and utensils. There was war between Asa and King Baasha of Israel all their days. King Baasha of Israel went up against Judah and built Ramah. We know this city is Ramah now. I'm pronouncing it the old Southern way. Sorry. So I'll correct that. Built Ramah to prevent anyone from going out or coming in to King Asa of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house and gave them into the hands of his servants. King Asa sent them to King Ben-Hadad, son of Tabrimon, son of Hezion of Aram, who resided in Damascus, saying, "Let there be an alliance between me and you, like that between my father and your father. I am sending you a present of silver and gold. Go, break your alliance with King Baasha of Israel, so that he may withdraw from me." Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel. He conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel, Meth-Maachah, and all Kinneroth, with all the land of Naphtali. When Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah and lived in Tirzah. Then King Asa made a proclamation to all Judah. None was exempt. They carried away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had been building. With them, King Asa built Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Now the rest of the acts of Asa, all his power, all that he did, and the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? But in his old age, he was diseased in his feet. Then Asa slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in the city of his father David. His son Jehoshaphat succeeded him. Stop there for a minute and see if there's anything important for you all.
It sounds like Asa would be King Josiah light.
Yeah, good.
There are reforms, but not quite enough.
Yep. That's a really a nice way to see that, right? Here is somebody who's clearly committed to reform, including entering into conflict with his own mother to cut down her sacred image, the image that she created, and yet didn't quite go all the way, but counted as a good one, right? He's on the nice list. Louise.
I'm a little confused as to the whole idea of him taking the gold and silver from Yahweh's temple and then using it as a political gift to make an alliance. Was that considered an okay thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's go back and take a look at that a little bit. It seems odd to me, the way that it's framed. Let's go take a look.
That's
So
16
here's,
beyond.
go ahead.
No, it's 16 and beyond, about
Yep.
3. Yeah.
So let there be an alliance between me and you. I'm sending you a payment of gold and silver. And then
Asa takes the remaining silver and gold from the treasuries of the temple of Yahweh. Maybe those treasuries were meant to be used that way.
yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It doesn't say anything condemning it, not even a phrase, so maybe it was okay, but it just seemed kind of weird to me.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a translation thing here that's weird. So Asa took all that verse 18, right? I skipped that one. Asa took the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of Yahweh. So not the appointments of the house, but instead in the storerooms.
Mm-hmm.
And the treasures of the king's house, again, storerooms, gave them into the hands of his servants. I wonder if there's something about that language that's weird. So yeah, either we're talking about silver and gold that is not dedicated to Yahweh, which is probably the most likely case, or there's just some other way in which we're coordinating these lines that that might not be the way that they intended for it to be read.
I have a note here that says
good.
on the dynasty's subsequent history. Oh wait, Asa imitates the policy of foreign alliance for which the great prophets constantly reproached the kings of Judah. That was
Sure.
So I guess it was kind of shifty thing.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the prophets are necessarily saying you shouldn't have taken any of that gold and silver and given it. It's much more that where the prophets will go with this. We've heard it a little bit before, even in the earlier narrative. Is if you trust that Yahweh gave you this land for you to inherit and from which you are to be a blessing to the whole world, and the king of Egypt comes against you, or the king of Assyria or Babylon comes against you, faithfulness does not look like running over to Egypt necessarily and saying, hey, I'm going to need your help kicking out the Assyrians. And so there's this, we'll actually get it in the narratives of First and Second Kings. We'll get these moments where it seems like the most faithless thing is the person not saying, Yahweh, please deliver us, but instead, I'm going to go form an alliance with this other party. But what's weird about that is that we also have narratives where that's lifted up as being good. And so it's not a clean, we shouldn't expect a sort of systematic ethical code for monarchs necessarily in this text, but there are moments where the narrator seems to be fine with it and moments where the narrator does not seem to be fine with it. And it's worth kind of holding some sense of the ambiguity there. Andy.
Yeah, if I did my math right, Asa reigned in the south for 2 years of Jeroboam's reign in the north.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is when Jeroboam died, they said Nadab, his son, reigned in his stead, and then we pick up with Baasa, king of Israel.
Yeah.
It's not like the normal documentation of who succeeded who in the north.
Right. We have these moments where you kind of have this genealogy working out well, and then moments where we don't. I'm going to pull back up the.
I mean, who's Baasa? Is he the son of Nadab?
1 second. Let me pull up this map for us. Let everybody see it. Where is that? Here we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Oh, there we go.
So this is the sort of the transfer of power that we have, and from time to time we have these moments where it's not direct transfer from Jeroboam down to Nadab, from Nadab to his son Baasha. It's this sideways movement, the same way that we can understand Ishbosheth to be king or not, but we have some sideways movement here. We have these moments where it's really not easy to determine where this flow of power goes from Jehoram to Ahaziah or Athaliah, back and forth, and Jehoash as well. Jehu is another good example of that. This whole thing is just, it's very confusing. We'll say it that way at the base level. This is probably a good enough map for us to see how it works. And just remember how they flow together.
We do see here, don't we, the fulfillment of Ahijah's prophecy? That there would be no, over the intermediate term, no surviving males, period, of Jeroboam's offspring. And it would look like to me, when we start with verse 25 and work our way through a few verses there, that Nadab, who's a remaining son of Jeroboam, is killed off, and Bashan from a different house, a totally different dynasty, comes into place.
Yep, good. That's exactly right. So there's that prophecy. There will be no one left in the house, and sure enough, there's no one left in the house. That's very good. So who is Baasha? We'll read a little bit more about him, but we sure don't know a whole lot.
This is better than the Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm reminded of, having loved those books, is Game of Thrones always provided a sort of family tree of the House of Targaryen or whatever in the back of the book. So you could always go back and say, now, who in the heck is this ancestor of so-and-so? So avail yourself of those things. It can be really helpful to see the way lineages work and don't work, and where power flows, if you want to try to keep the detail together. All right. And that is just a reminder, this particular thing, which is, it takes Solomon's death and the division of the monarchy around 922. And then I don't provide any detail from 922 to to the 700s necessarily. There's the fall of the Northern Kingdom. So all that kind of gets filled in with all this. This is just, these are the chapters where, chapter by chapter, we're going through these stories of these people. And sometimes they barely get a mention, and other times they get a full chapter. We'll get a whole chapter with Baasha. And we'll get a relatively large narrative about Ahab and Jezebel, for instance. So we'll have, anyway, that's where we are. That's where we are in the text. That said, where are we in the text? What verse did we stop at? 25? Great. Thank you. Nadab, son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the second year of King Asa of Judah. He reigned over Israel 2 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Yahweh, walking in the way of his ancestor, and in the sin that he caused Israel to commit. Baasha, son of Ahijah, of the house of Issachar, so now we have more detail. That's the tribe that he's from, conspired against him. And Baasha struck him down at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. For Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibbethon. So Baasha killed Nadab in the third year of King Asa of Judah and succeeded him. As soon as he was king, he killed all the house of Jeroboam. He left to the house of Jeroboam not one that breathed until he had destroyed it, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite, because of the sins of Jeroboam that he committed and that he caused Israel to commit, and because of the anger to which he had provoked Yahweh, the God of Israel. So there is that callback that Hutch just mentioned to the prophecy that no one would be left in the house of Jeroboam. Now, the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? There was war between Asa and King Baasha of Israel all their days. In the third year of King Asa of Judah, Baasha, son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah. He reigned 24 years. He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and in the sin that caused Israel to commit. All right. The word of Yahweh came to, and I wrote a whole paper on this in seminary, just to tell you how boring these papers can be. Jehu is the preferred pronunciation here. It's probably not great, but it's probably the one that works best for us. So Jehu, son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying, since I exalted you out of the dust and made you leader over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam and have caused my people Israel to sin, provoking me to anger with their sins. Therefore, I will consume Baasha and his house. I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Anyone belonging to Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat. Anyone of his who dies in the field, the birds of the air shall eat. Anticlimactic ending. Now the rest of the acts of Baasha, what he did in his power, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Baasha slept with his ancestors and was buried at Tirzah. His son Elah succeeded him. Moreover, the word of Yahweh came by the prophet Jehu, son of Hanani, against Baasha and his house, both because of all the evil that he did in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger with the work of his hands, in being like the house of Jeroboam, and also because he destroyed it. In the 26th year of King Asa of Judah, Elah, son of Baasha, began to reign over Israel in Tirzah. He reigned 2 years, but his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, conspired against him. When he was at Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arzah, who was in charge of the palace of Tirzah, Zimri came in and struck him down and killed him in the 27th year of King Asa of Judah, and succeeded him. So that's how we get that transfer of power, huh? A little coup, an assassination and a coup. I think that at some level, the narrators really want us to see in these rapid narratives just how deeply broken the system is, right? So I think that's a kind of a quick and dirty way of showing us enemies outside, enemies inside, enemies everywhere. Everything's fallen. Almost like the way that that the stories of the judges worked, right? It's the Canaanites, it's the Perizzites, it's the Hivites, it's the Jebusites. Oh no, it's actually our own people. We're just inside and outside. Violence is everywhere. Okay, verse 11, when he began to reign, as soon as he had seated himself on the throne, he killed all the house of Baasha. He did not leave him a single male of his kindred or friends. Some irony there, huh? Thus Zimri destroyed all the house of Baasha according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke against Baasha by the prophet Jehu, because all the sins of Baasha and the sins of his son Elah that they committed, and that they caused Israel to commit, provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Elah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? So I'll notice that there's something in the, a note in the chat for me. Verse 15. In the 27th year of King Asa of Judah, Zimri reigned 7 days in Tirzah. Now the troops were encamped against Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines. And the troops who were encamped heard it said, Zimri has conspired and he killed the king. Therefore all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. So acclamation by the army, another coup. So Omri went from Gibbethon and all Israel with him, and they besieged Tirzah. When Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house and he burned down the king's house over himself with fire, and he died because of the sins that he committed, doing evil in the sight of Yahweh, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and for the sin that he committed, causing Israel to sin. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and the conspiracy that he made, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? A very, very short chapter in that book, no doubt. Okay, then the people of Israel were divided in two parts. Half of the people followed Tibni, son of Ginath, to make him king. Half followed Omri. The people who followed Omri overcame the people who followed Tibni, son of Ginath. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. In the 21st year of King Asa of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel. He reigned for 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shamer for 2 talents of silver. He fortified the hill and called the city that he built Samaria, after the name of Shamer, the owner of the hill. Omri did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. He did more evil than all who were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and in the sins that he caused Israel to commit, provoking Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger by their idols. Now the rest of the acts of Omri, what he did, the power that he showed, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Omri slept with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria. His son Ahab succeeded him. All right, we're going to stop there for a second, just to see if you noticed anything. You're getting names, I hope, that are a little bit more familiar. Some of these monarchs in particular are names that are just like, toss them out if you don't want to remember them. But you've probably heard of Ahab before. Those of you who have done a lot of like Sunday school in the past, or maybe in popular culture, captain of a whaling vessel, perhaps. Anything that you noticed in the text?
Is this the only time Jezebel is mentioned?
No, there are references to Jezebel later, but this is her story. I mean, her story is about to unfold for us. Yeah. But there are other places. None of them are coming to mind right now, but there are other places where they, as I recall, will refer back to that harlot Jezebel, something along those lines, as I recall. She does not go down as a figure much beloved in Hebrew scripture. Yeah.
Jews fighting Jews becomes worse, and that we do have this more or less continuous warfare between Judah and Israel. And now the fighting escalates. The Israelites, people of Israel, are in a civil war between themselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's really good to see, right? It's fracturing is often one of the best ways for us to talk about the result of sin. And so division, violence, animosity, and the breakdown of relationships, that's sort of a symptom of the deeper disease. And so I think the narrator just is pointing to that over and over again. Really good for us to pick that up.
There's a message here, I think, that's quite modern, in that it seems like the kings fighting and all the separation and all and it's getting worse. As Hutch says, it's like coup after coup, murder this one, murder that one. And it seems to me that it goes kind of back in the mind to the peace when Solomon began to reign in the beginning. And all, the building of the temple and all that. Of course, we know Solomon then began to fall away, but there was a long period of peace. And I think that part of what the editor or the writer is trying to tell us is that in those days, peace among men and women came from adherence to the laws of Yahweh. And that even notice how many times when a king dies in this, what we've just read, it said there was continual warfare for all of the years of the reign, even when it wasn't actually recorded. And I think that's part of the message, is that without listening to the word and the message and the rules of Yahweh, there will be this continual descent and warfare and violence. And I kind of see some parallels to today.
Yeah.
Although today we do have the Holy Spirit, right? Yeah. I mean, the Jews didn't have any remnant of Jesus's message as Jesus left us the Spirit. And I think it's the Spirit, at least for me, that takes away that heavy feeling of, I'm really depressed now because we're crappy people. And there is no hope, but there is hope, not only in Jesus's message, but even if we don't listen to it, there's still the movement of the Spirit in very mysterious ways in community and in scripture and everywhere that keeps pulling us back to that message, that stay close to God. Really wasn't such a weird thing that the Jews first heard. We may think some of their rules were weird, but it's the idea of being close to your Creator and not listening to all of the noise and distraction of your current environment. And certainly we've got a lot of that too. We may not have idols on the hill, but we've got a lot of voices telling us, you don't need to listen to that primal voice of your God.
We've got idols on our phones and on the radio in our car. We got idols everywhere.
Oh yeah, and
we don't need
all distracting us from hearing.
Yeah.
I love the line, they're saying it a lot right now in a common prayer. Harden not your hearts, listen to the Lord. And we're hardened without even knowing that we're hardened.
Absolutely. Good. And one of the things that for our sake as we move toward Holy Week, that's good for us to see that in these narrations of how people are moved away from closeness with Yahweh and to something else and constantly surrounded by conflict and violence. Mm-hmm. One of the things that defines that movement is their desire for power. So who comes to power but the person who has power? And what does that power result in but more violence and more pain and suffering? And so we're moving toward a narrative where we see God's power on display in powerlessness, and giving that up and being obedient and remaining in relationship with Yahweh, even unto death. And so really good for us to see that theme as we approach Holy Week. What does a good king look like? Compare that to Zimri or Omri or whatever, who use their power to gain power and use their power to hurt We see somebody absorbing violence and moving toward powerlessness. Good for the church to remember. All right, we have 3 minutes. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? Can we finish the chapter?
We're at verse 29. We're about to meet King Ahab.
Okay, let's finish the chapter then. All right, in the 38th year of King Asa of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. Ahab, son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, he took as his wife Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians. It's Revelation chapter 2. That's where we get Jezebel again, by the way, 2:20. Had to Google that earlier. He went and served Baal and worshiped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built at Samaria. Ahab also made a sacred pole. Ahab did more to provoke the anger of Yahweh, the God of Israel, than had all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn. He set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, son of Nun. Bum, bum, bum. We'll just have to hold there for a little while. There's a lot, there's a lot going on, but Ahab is a disaster, and we get, I don't even know how many chapters of his disaster, but we get plenty. But here's the good news for those of you who kind of know where this goes. With Ahab comes another figure. It's Ahab and Jezebel, obviously. But apart from them, we also get another figure. Who's that figure?
Elijah. Do we see
Elijah.
the dawning of the prophetic movement here?
Yes. Yeah. So as we turn the chapter and get more of Ahab's story, Ahab sets off the story of Elijah. And this becomes not only a story about the monarch, but much more so about prophecy and about how it is that Elijah manifests God's will among the people in the middle of such a broken set of relationships. So that's good. Something to look forward to. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. We're going to cut off the YouTube feed here now and say goodbye to them. I hope you all have a wonderful week.